Good evening and welcome to Cognitive Learning Theory Newscast. I'm Glenn Harrison. Brad Lewis is on vacation. During this presentation I will provide you with a brief overview of the cognitive learning theory as well as the advantages and disadvantages associated with this theory. We will also look at the individuals, their work, and pertinent information behind the theory. We will also identify different research examples in practice associated with cognitive learning. I hope you enjoy the presentation, so go get your popcorn and let's get started. For most of us, the various learning theories have two chief values. One is in providing us with the vocabulary and a conceptual framework for interpreting the examples of learning that we observe. The theories do not give us solutions, but they do direct our attention to those variables that are crucial in finding solutions.
The cognitive learning theory is based upon looking at the whole rather than its parts, at patterns rather than the isolated events, and that the memory is a dynamic, systemized processor of information, and the previous knowledge is vital to learning. This theory focuses on the learning, finding meaning in what is being taught, and being able to apply the new information to examine previous experiences. Cognitivists are interested in how the mind makes sense out of stimuli in the environment, how information is processed, stored, and retrieved. Cognitive learning involves the use of memory, motivation, and thinking, and that reflection plays an important part in learning. They see learning as an internal process and contend that the amount learned depends on the processing capacity of the learner, the amount of effort expended during the learning process, the depth of the processing, and the learner's existing knowledge structure.
These are the core beliefs of the cognitive learning theorists. In the late 1950s, the cognitive doctrine began to take center stage as the leading theory of learning. However, it wasn't until the latter part of the 1970s that cognitive science became a major influence on instructional design.
There was a paradigm shift from the behaviorist theory that all behavior is caused by external stimuli or operant conditioning, and that all behavior can be explained without the need to consider internal mental states or consciousness, to the cognitive view that mental function can be understood, and the learner was viewed as information processor, and the brain was not seen as a black box, as the behaviorist model indicated. Alley 2004 states, educators claim that not all learning is observable, and that there is more to learning than a change in behavior. The strengths of the cognitive theory include mental function can be understood, the mind is not a black box, learning comes from making sense of stimuli from previous learning experiences that is stored in long-term memory for recall, meaningful information is easy to learn and remember, practice or rehearsing information improves retention of the learner, allows for the learner to analyze a task, break it down into smaller steps or chunks, use that information that moves from simple to complex from prior schema, and train learners to do the same task the same way to enable consistency. While behaviorism and cognitivists both support the practice of analyzing a task and breaking it down into manageable chunks, establishing objectives and measuring performance based on those objectives, they do not encourage more of an open-ended learning experience where the methods and results of learning are not easily measured and may not be the same for each learner. Limitations of the cognitive theory include information that is not meaningful to the learner and it will not be easy to learn or remember, does not promote more of an open-ended learning experience for the learner. Learning is limited if the learner does not have existing knowledge structure or schema to be able to compare and process new information. The learner learns a way to accomplish a task, but it may not be the way or suited to the learner or situation. And finally, designing instruction for all learners with different levels of schemas is costly and time-consuming.
Now for a short commercial break. We will be right back with more news.
Everybody get up.
The pioneers of the cognitive learning theory, beginning with the German Gestalt psychologists Max Wertheimer, Wolfgang Kellner, Kurt Hofke, and Kurt Lewin. We will also be looking at Edward C. Tellman, Jean Piaget, Jerome Bruner, David Ausubel, and Lev Vygotsky as major contributors to the cognitive learning theory. Gestalt, a German word which means pattern or shape. Gestalt psychologists proposed looking at the whole rather than its parts, at patterns rather than isolated events. This was a holistic approach that rejected the mechanist perspectives of the stimulus-response models. They posed that learning consists of the grasping of a structural whole and not just a mechanistic approach to a stimulus.
Learning, to the gestaltist, is a cognitive phenomenon. The organism comes to see the solution after pondering a problem. The learner thinks about all the ingredients necessary to solve the problem and puts them together cognitively. First one way, then another, until the problem is solved. When the solution comes, it comes suddenly. That is, the organism gains an insight to the solution of the problem. The problem can exist in only two states, unsolved and solved.
Edward C. Tellman was considered a pioneer in initiating the cognitive movement. He was best known for experiment with rags. He suggested that rags knew how the maze in which they were put was structured, because they had its mental map. Tellman claimed that rather than an automatic response to an event, behavior had both purpose and direction and occurred without reinforcement. Tellman's system was often justly treated as a precursor of contemporary cognitive psychology.
Jean Piaget's theory of individual cognitive development considered the backbone of cognitism. According to Piaget, the mechanism of change in cognition is the equilibration, which is a dynamic interplay of progressive equilibria, adaptation, and organization and growth and change in the master developmental process. Once encountered with a new learning situation, the individual draws on his or her prior knowledge to make the new experience understandable. Piaget also constructed models of child development and learning process. He identified four developmental stages and the cognitive processes associated with each of them: sensory motor, intuitive and pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational.
Lev Vygotsky was a Russian-Soviet psychologist that was known for his social cognition learning model, which views culture as playing a key role in the development of cognition. Vygotsky maintained that learning was concentrated on the interplay between the individual and society, and how social interaction and language come into play in affecting learning or the development of cognition. Vygotsky focused on categorical perception, logical memory, conceptual thinking, and self-regulated attention.
Jerome Bruner: development of conceptual understanding, cognitive skills, and learning strategies rather than the acquisition of knowledge. Bruner's focus: teaching approach. Learners should be encouraged to discover solutions via appropriate tasks, which require the application of relevant critical thinking skills. Also, Bruner's modes of thinking. Extended aspects of Piaget's theory. He identified three ways in which learners process information. Enacted level: the learner takes place via manipulation of objects and materials. Iconic level: objects are represented by visual images and are recognized for what they represent. And symbolic level: learning can take place using symbols, objects, and mental images. Language is used to represent thoughts and experiences. And finally, our last theorist, David Ausubel. He stressed the importance of active mental participation in meaningful learning tasks. Learning must be meaningful to be effective and permanent. He made a distinction between meaningful learning and rote learning. Meaningful learning relatable to what already one knows, so it can be easily integrated into one's existing cognitive structure. And rote learning, which is the material to be learnt, is not integrated, subsumed into existing cognitive structure, but learnt as isolated pieces of information.
Cognitive scientists, primarily from the discipline of psychology, have had the longest history of research in this arena. They attempt to discover the mental functions and processes that underlie observed behavior. These mental functions and processes include the study of how people receive, store, retrieve, transform, and transmit information. Neurobiologists study anatomy, physiology, pathology of the nervous system including the brain and related systems. They are primarily interested in the structures of the brain and how the brain actually works, including its electrical and chemical systems. Research associated with cognitive learning are information processing theories, memory and metacognition theories of transfer, mathematical learning models. The study of expertise also included a computer simulations, cognition and culture, and artificial intelligence.
To help students process information effectively and efficiently, the teacher need to employ the following strategies and principles when teaching their subjects. Provide organized instruction, use single coherent representations, link new material with what is currently known, carefully analyze the attention demands of instruction, recognize the limits of attention, sensory register, recognize the limitations of short-term memory, match encoding strategies with the material to be learned, provide opportunities for both verbal and imageal encoding, arrange for a variety of practice opportunities, eliminate redundancy, help learners become self-regulated. Basic characteristics of a classroom instruction based on cognitive theories can be summarized as follows. Emphasis on the active involvement of the learner in the learning process, learner control. Cognitive training, examples, self-planning, monitoring, and revising techniques. Use of a hierarchical analysis to identify and illustrate prerequisites, relationships, cognitive task analysis procedures. Emphasis on structuring, organization, sequencing information to facilitate optimal processing. Use of cognitive strategies such as outlining, summaries, synthesizers, advanced organizers, etc. Creation of learning environments that allow and encourage students to make connections with previously learned material, recall of prerequisite skills, use of relevant examples and analogies.
The following teaching methods have been utilized from cognitive learning theory: cognitive apprenticeship, reciprocal teaching, anchored instruction, inquiry learning, discovery learning, and problem-based learning. Thank you for watching this video. I enjoyed the class and enjoyed creating this project.